I think the Canada brand is very, very strong broadly. I think the EduCanada brand needs some time to settle so that we get back to being seen as the high quality, destination that we really are.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm Michael Sangster, your host, and I am joined, I keep saying this, I'm joined by a friend of mine, but Larissa is a friend, a new friend since I joined the National Association of Career Colleges, in that she has a great outreach view of the world that everybody needs to have conversations and chat, and stay in touch and figure out what's going on and be supportive of each other. And she's been very, very much so that for me. So I appreciate Larissa Bezo, our guest today, the President and CEO of the Canadian Bureau of International Education. So we let people introduce themselves, Larissa. Why don't you tell me a little bit about you, but also about CBIE, because I don't think many people will know, unless you're in this specific little world, what CBIE is.
Absolutely. And Michael, thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of this conversation. I have the privilege of leading CBIE, the Canadian Bureau for International Education. We are a national association that really is focused on international education. So anything that is facing the world, and an association that represents educational institutions from school boards right up to research-intensive universities and all institutions and colleges in between. And it's really focused on the global space and how we advance education and Canada's role and place in the world.
Larissa's one of those great people. She's from Saskatchewan. And I've yet to meet anybody bad from Saskatchewan, right? Is that actually where you were born?
No, ironically born in Toronto, but raised in Saskatchewan most of my life.
Most of it. Can't go wrong with Saskatchewan people. Salt of the earth, right?
Agreed.
Let's dive right in here. You're in that unique place. You get to see a couple of things. You get to see global trends, global things that are going on around international education, but you also get to see, and these are different topics, you get to see our workforce needs in Canada. And actually, you know what? They're not different topics, are they, when we talk about international education? Can you talk a little bit first about some of the things you're seeing around the world in education? And when we say international education, we mean people who come from abroad to study in a country or leave our country to go study somewhere. So what are you seeing as trends around the world?
And it's an interesting one. I think international education, broadly speaking, I think is at a genuine inflection point, not just in Canada, but what we're seeing globally. We've moved beyond the kind of growth at all costs that we've seen perhaps over this last decade. And I think we're being asked much more serious questions now about purpose and outcomes and systems integrity, how international education actually should serve students, communities, economies, in a sustainable way. And so I really welcome this conversation because I think the decisions that we take over these next few years will shape Canada's position for the next decade. The one thing I will add, though, for those perhaps who aren't as familiar with international education, is it isn't just about enrollment numbers or mobility patterns. I think it's important to kind of widen the frame a bit because we often talk about international education exclusively in terms of inbound student mobility or, how many students will come, where they'll study, for how long. But at its core, international education is actually something much, much bigger. It's about people, it's about knowledge and skills, it's about relationships moving across borders in ways that not only shape economies, but geopolitics and build long-term national capacity. And so I think often people tend to reduce international education to kind of managing volumes and looking at it from an immigration lens. But I think when we do that, we really miss the strategic value, especially in an environment where in Canada, we're really starting to talk about, economic diplomacy and our country's sovereignty. I think there's much more that international education has to contribute in terms of Canada's big, bold next steps.
And we focus in on immigration and education, when in fact there are a large amount of students that come here to educate and go home.
Absolutely.
When you talk about economic development, our place in the world, that is important, isn't it?
It is. And if countries don't kind of align education, with some of those broader goals in terms of their global engagement, their global presence, we end up exporting opportunities rather than actually building on them. And so it behooves us to be much more strategic in thinking about how international education contributes, to Canada's future.
It's not a good conversation until somebody says behooved. Let's be honest. That's what makes it good. We do like to be a bit irreverent, have a little bit of fun because there's so many serious things that are going on. We're talking, we have one of our career colleges right now that's spooling up a program in Kenya to train thousands of personal support workers there to help that country with what we've become so good at NAC and in our sector here in Canada, and then allow some of them to immigrate to Canada, but also leaving skills abroad too. And that gets lost, doesn't it?
It does. And I mean, we have to consider that mobility of learners, right, in that broader context. And there is kind of cooperation that has to happen that goes well beyond just, individual people making choices. You and I both know, Michael, I mean, skills pipelines don't materialize overnight. Mm-hmm. We're navigating some very serious workforce transitions, that require our training systems to be very flexible, also to be globally connected. And I think as well, the direction that we're really moving as a country requires more innovation, within this education ecosystem. And that is nurtured and fed through the kind of international collaboration that our education institutions engage in. And so I think when we consider international learners, whether that be, for example, in the case of learners learning in Kenya or potentially coming to Canada at some point, talent is globally mobile and they're not peripheral to the kinds of undertakings that Canada is looking to move. I think, the real question isn't whether international education should support national priorities, but I think we need to make sure that we have systems that are intentionally designed that allow us to really leverage that mobility and leverage those partnerships globally for Canada going forward.
And truth be told, when you look at what went on with our international student, people have said crisis a couple of years ago, something did need to change. You and I have talked about this before. We do know the system was flawed. It needed an adjustment. But I'm interested in your views because you're out there doing some unique stuff around communications and marketing and trying to tell the story. You should be given $100 million to go do that work compared to what you probably have in the budget for getting our story out to the world. But what's the damage on the global scale? What's been done to the Tune Canada look view, do you think?
The brand has been significantly damaged. And I think there's a perceived sense of instability. I look back on the last couple of years, 16, 17, 18 different policy changes. If you're a student considering a learning opportunity abroad, you want to be coming into a stable policy environment. And this is one of the challenges that I think we're trying to navigate in wanting to see a more stable environment. I mean, the quality offering in Canada has not changed, but the perception because of that instability is that quality is being put into question because of the policy instability. And I think, reputation doesn't just come from policy generosity, as we've perhaps seen in maybe the last 10 or 12 years, but it comes from consistently delivering and having a predictable environment. At the end of the day, I think we don't need to be the biggest destination when it comes to a vibrant international education and an education sector. We just need to be a coherent one. And I think the next decade of international education isn't going to be defined by growth. It's going to be defined by trust. And countries that treat students transactionally are going to lose them relationally. So I think as we're, undertaking this whole kind of sector-led brand piece and really trying to tell an accurate, measured narrative about what Canada has to offer, I think our competitive advantage in international education will come from that credibility and the trust that we are able to, in fact, deliver on.
I think of a group of 8 nursing students in Newfoundland going through a career college and the nursing college in a partnership and being perfectly assimilated in the community, being part of the structure, the fiber of the place. We need to get there. We need to get to a balanced outcome here. And we can all admit there were flaws in the system. I'm always careful on my language here, but we had challenges in our sector with some organizations that took in too many students or weren't treating them properly. Absolutely. We are a very small component of the overall, but I would argue it, and you are a master at this, but I believe it behooves us to bring these people together, and I had to do it, and make sure that all levels of post-secondary education are building a system that supports students, protects students that come here and gives them a chance to succeed or go home and be part of their own community after they finish their education as well.
I agree, Michael. I think when you step back and look at our education ecosystem, every part of that system matters. Each of our institutions, has a role to play, and not hierarchically. I mean, we've got universities, we've got private career colleges, we've got public colleges, we've got a range of institutions, but each plays a unique role functionally. And I think both the challenge and the opportunity is ensuring that those roles are aligned and mutually reinforcing. If we really want to see, benefit come and opportunity meaningfully come through our education system. And so I agree. I mean, I think looking ahead, we're likely going to see, we're already seeing, I think, some substantive shifts given the ceiling that we have, much more targeted growth, rather than the kind of volume-based expansion that we saw previously, under former international education strategies. I think this situation at the moment is also forcing, I think, some very important discussions right across the Federation in 13 of our jurisdictions around what does it mean to have differentiation by institution type, by program purpose. But I think also we have to recognize that's happening against the backdrop of a context where there is a higher expectation around student outcomes. It's not just about enrollment. And I think institutions and systems that can clearly articulate who they serve, what outcomes they deliver, how they connect education to labor market, whether that be in Canada or abroad, I think are going to be the ones that thrive at the end of the day.
What's heartening for me is we've seen this. Well, all you have to look at to touch on one of your points there was we have 2 community colleges in Ontario merging. Who would have ever seen that happening until a couple of years ago? And from day one of the crisis, I know NAC, because I was the one speaking on our behalf, we never criticized the other levels of post-secondary education. My members don't have the same stress that a community college does on funding and tuition freezes. So I'm very excited and I'm looking forward to our conference because I know you're going to come and speak. We've got Alex Usher. We've got a university president that's going to come speak on the panel as well. And I know Pari and I have been chatting back and forth about getting out SciCan to come out and have some role in that too. And I'm excited that they will in some place. The partnerships are starting to be better. The communication is starting to be better. There's a lot less finger pointing amongst us in Canada as to what the problem is and more conversation about where do we go from here? How do we make sure we train the workforce we need? You just need to look at the long-term care or the dental industries in Canada to understand we have massive job shortages too that need to be filled. I always go back to the statistics, Canada statistics, that we had 7 workers for every retiree, and by 2035, we're going to have 2 workers for every retiree. That's not sustainable. We have got to find a solution to this to figure out who we're going to get into Canada, how we're going to train them, how we're going to put them to work, and how we're going to manage this because we've still got needs for that. So I'm excited about the future a little bit because I think people have kind of rallied. You've been a big leader in getting people rallying, making conversations happen.
I agree, Michael. And if you consider, right, some of Canada's big national projects, take housing, clean energy, digital transformation, pick any of them. I mean, the work that our education sector does touches on all of them. And so I think international education intersects, very directly with workforce development. I mean, the reality is, as we said earlier, Canada needs skilled talent at all levels. Students want meaningful careers. Employers want job-ready graduates. And I think trying to bring those 3 interests together intentionally, transparently, I think is really where the real work lies when we think about the future.
We have long argued at NAC, focus the workforce funding on jobs we need, the training we need for the careers we need. So in the fall budget, the government took away a grant for students over 60 weeks at our colleges, but they've just instituted back in a consultation interest in renewing that grant effective immediately for August 1st, I guess, in the next year. Nursing, paramedic, early childhood education, and of course, I've forgotten the third one now that I was on a roll, but it was nursing, paramedic, early childhood education. The other one will come to me in a minute. Crucial sectors that they said, okay, yep, we get it. You're important. We're going to refund that grant. I'd like to see us keep building that list out to the things that are important. We're okay with grant money not necessarily going to program training that isn't crucial to our future as a country. So we're looking forward to the conversations that are going on right now because I think there is a window to readjust things, and also excited to see some reinvestment in some of the public education system too. And the colleges and universities are working with us that want to partner, that want to chat. Want to have a university president say, I want to come to your event. I want to come speak on the panel. I want people to understand the importance of career education too, and how some of our graduates go to a career college when they're done because that's what gets them into the job they need. They needed that other one skill. So I'm really, that makes me optimistic. and I'm looking forward. Let me go in a new direction here for a second. We focus on domestic training more than international training. That was the difficult challenge for us during the international student crisis because we really weren't a big part of the problem, but we sure sounded like it. When I always say when the minister has a flag and a podium, and you're not standing behind him at the flag and the podium, you're usually not in a good place. And that day we weren't, but we kind of worked our way through it. We're focused on that kind of training, but I wanted to pivot back to something else. Your own life. What is a skill? Because we also have students that listen to this, and we've got a couple of our colleges that play this podcast to their students. What is a skill that Larissa has that has made her successful?
The million-dollar question. I would say probably the ability to navigate complexity. I am most energized by work that involves translating between different perspectives, having to, really take the pulse when you're trying to navigate complex, often very abstract situations. In the international space, I would say that's probably where the work is hardest, but it's also the space where it has the potential to have the greatest impact and align with purpose.
Did you have that naturally? Do you think your brain was that way, or did you have to work your way to that? I would say that's not one of my best strengths. It takes me a long time. I have to map it. I've got to get a big piece of paper and almost write all the stuff up and connect dots before I really see it sometimes.
I think I came upon that quite early in life. I grew up in a family environment with family, grandparents that were very, very involved in community, very diverse communities. And so it pulled me into spaces where you needed a broker, you needed a peacemaker, you needed somebody who could kind of diplomatically bring people together when it came to community collaboration. And so I think from an early age, we grew up in a province, Michael, right? 24,000 volunteer organizations out of 1 million residents in the province of Saskatchewan. You learn to navigate in that ambiguity, I think, from an early age. And I've kind of carried that forward. I think that's partly what's drawn me into the international work.
Well, I had the misfortune of actually ended up growing up in Manitoba. Hopefully no one's Manitoba's listening, but I'm kidding. Same attitude. Community. I always argued nobody could put on a volunteer event like Manitoba. Like the people come together. You could have the Briar on and something going on with the Jets and something over here and something over here, and they had more volunteers than they needed. I've never seen anything like it. And the most unique event I've ever seen, I used to play bagpipes at it every year, was called Folklorama, which was a collection of 50.
We had Mosaic in Regina. Yes, exactly. All right.
50 plus countries hosting pavilions every night for 2 weeks about their own culture and their own food and their own people. And it was absolutely, you go to the Filipino night and you go to the Great British night, and we'd have so much fun going back and forth to all these events. And then we would perform, my brothers and I, the English one and the Scottish one for a week. And it was so much fun.
It's one of the things that's always struck me about my more recent years living in Ottawa, that there are unique individual festivals of sharing, but there isn't a community coming together to share everything.
Now we got the project we can work on, Larissa, because you and I both have a lot of time on our hands, right?
Indeed, Michael.
Talk to me about a mentor in your life, someone who had an impact. And I always ask people when they're done answering to tell me, do you think the person knows they were your mentor or knew or knows now?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've been fortunate to have a few, but the one who had a really profound impact on me was an individual by the name of Al Johnson. He was a deputy provincial treasurer in Saskatchewan under Tommy Douglas, and he played a really instrumental role in establishing Medicare in Canada under the Douglas and Pearson governments. Mm-hmm. But ironically, what influenced me most, beyond, his being a part of something so monumental for Canada, was that he understood how public service should work, not as authority, but as responsibility. And he believed that public servants should experiment and focus on making life better for others. I got to know Al later on in his life when he was writing his book about a biography about the Douglas government. And I helped him do research for the book. And so we spent long hours together sitting in a legislative library in Saskatchewan. So we'd sit side by side going through estimates, and he would tell me stories about decisions that were contested at the time, or, risks that didn't feel safe, or choices that only made sense if you were thinking decades ahead rather than in election cycles. And he was a true statesman. He believed in big ideas. He was willing to take risks to leave something lasting. And one of my favorite stories that Al shared was his role in helping bring this world-renowned Japanese designer, I think Minori Yamasaki, I think was his name at the time. He brought him to Regina in the 60s to set up the whole Wascana Center. And Al said, the province clearly couldn't afford it, but it wasn't a question of whether the province could afford it. His motivation was, will this investment matter a generation from now? And so his influence on me was really, staying true to that long-term thinking and that sense of service. Al passed. I, had the privilege of getting to know him, but no, I don't think he fully comprehended the impact that he had on me and, the time we spent sitting in the legislative library.
We asked the question because we believe that's a big part of education, whether it's in a big classroom, a little classroom, that mentoring relationship that can develop. And I'm always peeking away at these little stories, and we release them on Mondays on occasion called Mentor Monday, because instructors, admissions people, career people, association people can all have an impact on somebody if you just kind of lean over the desk a little bit more than you would normally and show yourself. So we touch on it because there's so many of these stories. The funny part for me, every time I ask the question, I think of a new one. And it's funny how they change. And I'm sitting here now thinking about it, and I hope he never hears this, but Wayne Wooters, the former clerk of the Privy Council, in his own way, we became good friends, went to Grey Cup many, many times. He's still with us. I'll call him and tell him I said kind words about him because he guided me a little bit on calm down, slow down, take a deep breath. You're not going to win or lose this thing in Ottawa today. You're going to win or lose it over the next 6 months. And just sage advice from somebody who'd been around. And he came out of the Saskatchewan government, did, as many people in Ottawa do come out of Saskatchewan government, especially in the Trudeau 1 government. There was quite a few that were there.
Well, and I think you're right, Michael. And I think at its core, because I've compared notes with many colleagues as well in terms of their mentors, I think it's recognizing that sometimes it's not a big intervention, right? But it's being willing to be human, take the time, and actually, even if it's a few minutes, investing time in that person and approaching it from a place of sincerity.
Oh.
We're all so busy, it's easy to lose track of those things. But for someone, that 5 minutes you took can mean the world.
And I'm struck with somebody we're both in education. This is going to be a key of the rebuild of international education too, is making sure those moments exist, those relationships, that bonding to the community that is so crucial for international students to be successful.
I agree, Michael. And I think in order for us to do that impactfully, and in order for us to really create that welcoming environment that we wish, that goes well beyond what happens on our campuses, right? That requires community leaders to be engaged. That requires industry to be engaged. It really is a whole of ecosystem effort. But we know historically that pays tremendous dividends in terms of building a future. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I think we have a wonderful opportunity, before us. And certainly from the CBIE lens, I mean, we're committed to doing what we can to move this conversation forward, but also to move us towards concrete actions that help build that kind of connection into community.
So I know you well enough by now to know you are an optimist. You're also a King's Coronation medalist. Larissa received a King's Coronation Medal for her service to the community last year. It was my honor to present it to her. And when we talk about collaboration, one of the things that was interesting was that we were given a selection of people to nominate. And I reached out to Larissa, and we were able to give some to members from the community college world too, because it isn't about competition. It's about, we say, co-opetition. And it was really neat across the country to be able to give out some of those medals that you nominated some people for us to bring their name forward. I thought that was really quite neat. But I enjoyed presenting yours to, ironically, we did it in Quebec at a golf course in Quebec, but it was really quite nice to present that to you. So let me circle back though. Mm-hmm. Why are you optimistic about international education in Canada?
At the core of it, it's about people. And we are a country that has been globally connected from the very beginning. I think our future, and certainly the direction that even this government is taking under Prime Minister Carney, we're looking to further lean into that global connection and those global relationships. And I think our education institutions just have a tremendous role to play in advancing that connection and those opportunities. I'm excited about that because when you put people at the core of it, their ideas, their energy, their good sense of making a difference both for people on the planet, it's hard not to be optimistic, Michael. We have the privilege of working in the best sector in the world.
That clip is perfect to describe not only you, but where we're going. But I really you've made me think differently about this global stage. Everybody's thinking defense right now. Everything's defense, defense, defense. And we're doing a lot of work with the Navy. We're doing a little bit of work with the Air Force now. We're branching into how do we do more things to train the workforce they need. But you're talking about our outreach to the world when you talk about international education, how it aligns to the Carney government's pivoting away from the United States which, whether you agree with that or not, at the end of the day, the more markets we have available to us, the better off Canada's going to be. Washington will change again. But at the end of the day, the more out markets, the more connections, the more places we're dealing with, the better off we're going to be. So you're talking about education being one of those levers.
Absolutely, Michael. And I think what most don't realize, or I think are slowly starting to realize, our education institutions have been doing this for decades. And so there's an expertise here and a global presence. I mean, our institutions have been planting flags in every corner of the world for many, many years. And so there are longstanding relationships. There's trust. We've been cultivating a sense of who Canada is in the world through our academic relationships and mobility. And I think there's so much more that we can lean into. To your point, we're trying to open doors in new markets. Our institutions are already there helping align regulatory frameworks and helping build capacity of those receptor governments, and so we're really leading the way in many facets of this engagement. And I think there's opportunities to scale that. As industry are trying to find their way, universities, colleges, other institutions are great partners in this because they already have their feet on the ground and their hands kind of engaged with those governments around the world. So I can only encourage more of that type of engagement.
It behooves us to circle back. So that's 3 now. 2, Mike, one Larissa. To circle back to the earlier part of the conversation and think about the impact we also have, because I don't know this very well, the impact we have of Canadians studying abroad. I'm interested in that other part because we never talk about that. And then the part I really want to come back to, you touched it earlier, but where we do need to get to urgently is consistency of policy for those students, for the educational institutions. I can't imagine what it's like in an institution that has a large component of international students to even understand what the rules are some week. And so I think that's the one thing our sector owes it to work with government as hard and tirelessly as we can to get some clarity on exactly what the rules are. I'm constantly talking to the department about things that we can't figure out.
I really appreciate you asking the question about our Canadian youth having experiences abroad. I mean, that's a part of this equation. If Canada wants to be that middle power that punches above its weight, we need globally connected citizens and not just industry that's globally connected or not just post-secondary institutions. We need our youth helping Canada connect and build those people-to-people ties. Those are the bridges that will sustain us even when things get challenging diplomatically. And to be honest, Canada does not rank well in terms of the level of global engagement of our youth. I would say on average, probably 3% of our post-secondary students go abroad, which is very, very low if you compare that with the Europeans and others. The federal government.
Americans sit in that? Are they higher than us as well?
A touch higher. I mean, but they've had some long-standing scholarship programs like the Fulbright Scholars, right? That's been around for decades. They do tracer studies and they can tell you, someone's now a senator and they started out as a student working in Cambodia, helping, work on a particular local project. So this is an area where there's more work to be done considerably. We had a pilot under the last international education strategy, the Global Skills Opportunity Initiative, that sent over 15,000 Canadian youth abroad. And the focus is on kids coming from more challenging socioeconomic backgrounds and really wanting to see students go broadly out into the world. Those experiences were transformative for those kids. The data is astounding. We were really hoping to see more of an investment, but I think in this environment of constraint, it's just one of these programs that has gotten set aside. I really hope we return to it because it's not in our long-term interest not to have our youth globally engaged.
I hope so as well. I'd heard you talk about that before, so I was intrigued by that. Before we go, I think we didn't touch quite on the consistency of administration and policies. That would make a big difference. Set the policy for a year and leave it alone, right? Set it for 2 years, leave it alone. You would be a big proponent of that, wouldn't you?
Yes. I mean, we really need that stability. I think the Canada brand is very, very strong broadly. I think the EduCanada brand needs some time to settle so that we get back to being seen as the high quality, destination that we really are. But I think in that context and with that stability, what I'd really like to see is more of an acknowledgement of the role that international education can play in Canada's future prosperity. We talk about talent, but it's not just about talent. There's so much more. There's the work that we do in research and innovation. There's the work that we do in terms of meeting our labor force needs. There's the work that we do in terms of all of that soft diplomacy and moving in a direction where we embrace more broadly the global connections that our institutions foster, I think is in Canada's best interest. And I'd like to see us really move in a direction where we acknowledge that and share with Canadians the true value that comes from the internationalization of our education institutions, because that value extends far beyond, international students coming into our communities.
And that would be a wonderful thing to get to, and it entails us all working together as well. And
absolutely.
Finding common ground that supports us all. So I think I'm going to ask you if there's anything else that you wanted to add today before we sign off.
No, Michael, I do want to express very sincere appreciation for the collaboration that we've had. I know at times, it can be challenging and there are tensions and things to navigate, but I've really appreciated your openness, your willingness to have direct conversations and, really coming from a place of genuine desire to collaborate. It's been greatly appreciated. And I think, we all end up stronger when our associations and our institutions work together. We all have a role to play in this equation.
Well, I can't agree more. I appreciate the kind words, Larissa. You've also been a good vent on occasion. I think we have vented at each other, sometimes over a glass of wine. None of this have been easy. And there's been a few phone calls where either one of us had somebody to listen to. It's important to have people like you around the sector with stability who've seen it and have done it and know what's going on. For others who've come in like I did, and I said it earlier, it was important to me to have somebody I could chat with. And you gave me some good advice and some good thoughts. And that's important because we have to look at the overall, not our own individual institutions. And I'm lucky. I've got my board here this week. I'm lucky to have a board that comes together and they all take off their corporate hats and put the NAC hat on when we meet. And it's really quite helpful. But that's not everybody. And so that's why it's so crucial to have people we can chat through things and figure it out and be frank with. So I appreciate you, Larissa. Look forward to seeing you soon. And with that, we will end this week's edition of the Ed Up Canada podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Ed Up Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4- or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.